black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
We must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I'd like to welcome for those of you who are new to the show. And for those of you who are also, this is their first time, the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show where I tend to correct errors where errors are found and introduce facts where I find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And this show is part two of a two-part series that I'm doing on political and economic racism. Why there is a wealth gap. Why are black people still saying the same things our ancestors said about fairness in this culture, about dealing with racism? And the first part I tried to talk about, how did we get this wealth gap? And I left off on that topic, and then I'm going to continue on from where I left off on this show. And I hope you get some information that goes on. And I always use books that I've read. I read many books, and I do my show based on a lot of the research. I just don't Google. I read. Why do we do things the way we do? We have like this one here, post-traumatic slave syndrome. You can't have 246 years of horror and not have any kind of trauma being done to you. This Dr. Joy DeGruy did a 6-year research, and she wrote this book that talks about, just like PTSD. It's, she wants you to understand that it's a generational thing. Sometimes why we act the way we act. When our women were raped, when we were treated like animals, and those kind of things. This other book is called The Essential Kerner Commission, and I wanted people to understand that this was a commission that was established after the many riots that people of black African descent were having in the 60s. It wasn't because we were just vicious animals. It's because we were tired of the lies and the system that was not working for us. After 100 years prior, we were told that we were citizens and that we had the right to vote. We were still struggling to even get the vote. If you've seen any kind of documentaries of what was happening, the bombings, the Ku Klux Klan, the lynchings, the police brutalizing black people still going on to this day, on traffic stops. The rise of people like the Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party. Those are not revolutionary. They were reactive to a system that was not meant for them, okay? That's the thing. Black people cannot be racist. I know that sounds strange to many of you. Racism is a power dynamic when one group dominates over all the other groups, okay? And that other group will react to that domination. So all the people that are labeled, radicals in the 60s, because we had our own communication system, but the dominant communication always set a narrative to maintain this rationale to maintain power, to show that white people had the power and we were just the savages. little more civilized in the 1900s. But no, that's the reason we held you in bondage for hundreds of years prior to that. No, so that narrative still exists. Yeah, we freed you in 1865, but you still needed white control, okay? And that white control did not benefit my people. It did not benefit the group. There was always a reaction, but we still created politicians. We still had laws passed. We still struggled, but it was a struggle, no difference. So we had the apartheid that people think only associated with South Africa in the 1900s. It started with us. Those Dutch and people of German descent who studied America. The Nazis studied America in the 1930s when it comes to what they did to, in form of segregation, to establish their Nazi laws. You did not know that. They studied the American way of segregating us. They did it to the Jews in Europe in the 1930s, but they learned it from America, the land of the free. Who are we talking about? The white population. The Kerner Commission came up with the famous statement that said there are two Americans, one black, one white, separate but unequal. This was not something that came up from a black person. It came up from a commission established by Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1967. In July of 1967, after one of the riots, one big one in July. You think there were just troops in American streets today in LA and Detroit and Chicago and places like that, but there were troops on American soil in Detroit, okay, that came down there. There were machine gun nests on corner streets. So this is nothing new in America. If you don't understand the past, you will always doomed to repeat it in the present moment. That's what I'm doing this show, okay? In order to understand the present, you got to see the president. Got to see the past. Let's go on to some of these statements that I'm going to go with my discussion. When this democratic system was first set up in 1787 with the creation of the United States Constitution, this is where I left off in my last show. It was first set up in such a way to serve the needs of those in power, the elite like themselves. That's who it was set up for. Now, we the people was not you, me, or anybody that looked like me. It was for white men and elite white men. Same type of corporate people that's running the government now, the billionaire class, we will call them today. Let's go on to the next. That's the we the people that was set up for. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. It was the ability to access, and that's one of the elastic kind of clauses, and participate in this political wars based on our unique interests as people of African descent in this country. This was what the civil rights movement was and still is all about. It's one of the things. It was open to interest groups. In other words, one of the best kept secrets about the Constitution, it was that they expected you and other interest groups, from the farming interests or the shipbuilding interests, or the corporate interests or social interests. Everyone will be vying for the pieces of the pie. Okay, that mountain or that hill, just like in a battle. And each army or interest group is going to have to fight each other to maintain or get to that top of that hill. That's how the system was set up. Okay, and if you don't participate in that perpetual debate or the perpetual war, you will not get any benefits from that system. So when you say, well, the system doesn't work for me, well, that's why. If you don't participate in it, if you don't vote, if you don't do anything that, or make sure that you support a group or organization that does the watchdogging, you will not get any of the benefits of the American system. But the black people have always known that. We've always known that. Let's go on to the next one. For without any participation in these perpetual political battles, like I said, our own social interests as people of African descent in this country will never be fulfilled. So if you're just sitting back and waiting for the government to do this, or we promise this or promise that, if you don't participate and you're just sitting there when other people are going up that hill fighting for their interests, and you're sitting at the bottom of the hill doing nothing but watching them participate and thinking that their interest is going to fulfill your interest, you're a fool. Let's go on to the next one. Martin Luther King acted in 1963. 63. Which way are we, that's based on his book, which way are we headed towards as a people? Is it to chaos or community? And like he said in that video that you saw before this show, he said that, you know, that dream that he had when he said in 1963, and you know, that I have a dream, he said it became a nightmare. Okay, the battle, the realities of the social and economic war that he had to fight between 63 and when he made that speech, I think in 1967, a year before he was assassinated as part of that political war, he said it became a nightmare. And if you don't understand that history, and if you don't participate, voting does have consequences. If you're living in America in 2025, in November of 2025, since January of 2025 until now, you saw the horrors of a political war, okay? And if you don't understand how it affects your life, well, I don't know, you must have been sleeping for the last 10, 11 months, okay? Let's go on to the next one, okay? This is another part of the economics. If we talk about capitalism and socialism, what is capitalism? It's owning and controlling the tools, the land, and its resources while using other people's labor to enrich yourself. That's what companies do. That's what capitalists do. They don't care about your interests. The worst form of leadership in the public realm of politics is a CEO. A CEO makes the worst type of leader because a CEO is a dictator. Okay? It doesn't work like that. You can't tell a private company CEO what to do. It's what he does top down. So all the people who voted for the person in office now because he was a businessman, that's the worst form of elected official. Okay? It's always been known that because he had to work like a dictator. My word. What I say. I'm only here for the small group of people in my cabinet or in my who I got to answer to every quarter for our budget. Okay, that's all they earn. The rest of the people, the workers, they don't give a dang. So you wonder why things are falling apart? You cut up systems, you cut up companies, or you cut up a country. And plug in whoever you want to plug in. A system does not work. A political system, a political entity does not function for the people that way. It only functions for those who are in the executive branch. That's what we have. A CEO who only concerned, who owns the tools, the land, and its resource. That's where the laws always focus on. It doesn't focus on the workers. So if you vote for somebody based on that person being a good businessman, you're foolish. And look what happens. Let's go on to the next. In 1865, when enslavement ended, people of African descent, descended people were free by law, but economically we were socially engineered into a deliberately created underclass. Okay, let's go on. I'll explain a little more. Economic racism, which is another a way of controlling a society, is a competitive relationship between groups of people who are competing for the ownership and control of wealth, resources, and power. That's what we're talking about. Different interest groups. If you want to understand a person, unmask their interests, and you can find it ain't the same as yours. So you got to fight for what's your interest. That's how this system was established. That's what this government is based on. This is what a democracy does. You got to fight and participate in the perpetual war to maintain your interest. And once you get to that, anywhere up along that hill, you got to maintain it. You got to show vigilance. You got to fight the attack of other interest groups who want to take what's yours. This is how this democratic system works. And if you got something better, well, let me know. But if you don't participate in it, don't complain when it doesn't work for you. You got to make sure you fight up that hill too. Okay, let's go on to it. Next one. We were free, black people were free without any economic compensation for the previous 246 years of free labor under harsh conditions, horrendous conditions, cruel conditions. 246 from 1619 to 1865, which made us an economic underclass even with the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. There were civil rights laws passed by the so-called radical Republicans after the Civil War, but they were vetoed by a white racist Johnson who took over after Lincoln was assassinated, and then those same people who are white Americans after that ignored the blacks in the South from 1865 all the way to 1965. That's why we were always struggling. We'll go 2 steps forward during that, and 5 steps backwards, all with that white backlash. Whenever we gain any kind of thing by law, that's the struggle, that's the battle up that hill, okay? And for those of you today to ignore that history and do nothing in the last 2024 election, you wondering why we having problems today, I blame you. Let's go on to the next one. In 1860, this is some statistics. The pre-Civil War days, in 1860 pre-Civil War days, people of African descent only owned 0.5% of American wealth, while 99.5% of the American wealth was owned by white Americans. Okay? How can we economically equal? This is where we started off. And we were still, many of us were still enslaved. Let's go on to the next. This is the economic racism I talk. And why we were like that? By law. It wasn't because we were dumb, stupid. Look at, every February we talk about the millions of things that black people invented in this country. Okay? So we're not stupid people. We had our banks, we had our own towns and communities. And what happened to them? Laws were passed by white elites and destroyed them. Or white people, just like what happened in Tulsa and places like that, burnt it down to the ground. We got. Let me go to this book onto my left over here. Let's zoom in. The Wilmington Lie. Okay, that was about 1898. The murderous coup of. This is what we had to deal with. Okay, we're American citizens. This book here called "We Charge Genocide." Let me just read you something in the back of it, okay? This is the historic petition first presented to the United Nations in 1951 by its author, William L. Patterson, Paul Robeson, and I think Du Bois, to support the charge that the racism of government and its agencies in America, you're talking about America, is a crime punishable under the UN Genocide Code. The petition presented specific, documented evidence of inhumane, racist practice in the United States, the innumerable beatings, frame-ups, arrests, murder of black Americans continued unabated, but no adequate remedial measures were taken by the government or its authorities. Look how thick this book is. This was in 1951, black people went to the UN to charge the United States government with genocide. We're talking about what's going on in Gaza, what was going on in America from the time we were enslaved. 346 years. This is 1951, and we're still talking about that. And where's that history? This is what I'm talking if you don't face this truth. Okay? We had towns, we had communities. We tried to work with white America. We get burnt out. Tulsa, Okasee in Florida, Rosewood in Florida, okay? Neighborhoods in Chicago, okay? East St. Louis, okay? Arkansas, Elaine, Arkansas, butchered, hundreds of black people slaughtered, lynchings. This is what we have to deal with. Why we talk about reparations? Oh, we didn't live back there. In the first show, I talk about America is an old house, and we are the occupants of that old house. And if you don't fix that old house, it's going to fall apart around you. And look what's going on today, trying to maintain that racist, white authoritarian, white supremacy ideology that didn't work during the Civil War. Look what happened to all the cities that went into the Confederacy. They were burnt to the ground. Millions of people died. 2% of the American population died in that Civil War. So America got to face that reality, not the mythology, okay? The Founding Fathers created a system, but they understood that they were going to leave it up to future generations to deal with it. So let's go on to the next of the slide. Okay, we were left, in a sense, playing a bad game of Monopoly. I got this from Dr. Claude Anderson, this type of analogy, okay? In Monopoly, this is how we were playing. We were told you're free in 1865, no economic compensation, no psychological condition after 246 years of wholesale trauma. You're just free, no economic recompense, nothing. We're funneled into a secondary underclass system by Jim Crow, black codes, and all these other things. And then we are told to pull yourself by your bootstraps, like Martin was talking about. In Monopoly, at the beginning, everybody's supposed to get $1,500. That's how the game is played. Okay, Monopoly money. But in 1869, we were free, but was given no economic compensation for our 246 years of free labor. That's equivalent of black people getting $10 in Monopoly money to start the game. Can't win the economic game like that. $1,500 white people got, okay? 60, they're 90% of the wealth, 99.5% of the wealth because of laws that was established based on racism and prejudice and all the other things that went along with the founding of this country. And then we're just given, I wouldn't even say even $10, but look what we created. We did our best. We created our own communities, but then white people will come and destroy it. We invested in banks, then they would take that money and use it for other things, leaving us hanging. It was a constant struggle. We still had to deal with the 1865. We had to, the civil rights, the March on Washington in 1963 was for jobs and freedom. That was the title of the civil rights of the March on Washington in 1963. That dream that Martin Luther King was talking about. And in that video, he said that dream became a nightmare. Okay, this is you heard it from Martin Luther King himself, the man who said, "I have a dream." No, you don't hear that talked about by politicians. They always talk about what he said in 1963, but in 1967, he was disillusioned by what was told, what was going on in Montgomery, where people still being lynched, people were still, even white kids who were part of SNCC and those organizations going down to register people to vote were getting their buses burned, were getting attacked, So they were white allies who were also dying also, but if you don't tell our history, you don't learn about those people, okay? That the many white folks who died even during that Montgomery March, they were white, a preacher, a reverend, he was beaten to death, during that march, okay? A white woman from Viola, I think, who came from Detroit, she decided to travel back and forth and drive people marches from Birmingham to Montgomery, that march, okay, the Emmett Pettus Bridge. She was shot to death by Ku Klux Klan on one of the path on the way back, giving people rides. There was a white woman who came south from Detroit, a housewife who wanted to be part of that. So if you don't understand that, John Brown, there were white folks who participated, who saw the wrong in that, like they have today, but it's still our fight. It's our fight up that hill and to maintain it, but to talk about it, to understand that. Understand, that's what we talk about reparations. When you're giving us just $10 of monopoly money and everybody else started with $1,500, okay, equivalent. Let's go on to the next. The meaning, the meaning of words that end with the suffix ism, as in classism, sexism, racism, means to keep the prevailing condition or predominant condition, in other words, let nothing change. So when you talk about racism, let nothing change. From even though the Civil Rights Act came in, but racism is still going on, okay? It's not as bad, but it's still elements of it, even to this very day. Let's go on to the next. Okay. Also, you got to understand this. People always say, just because we have a lot of black millionaires or billionaires, that means nothing if you don't own anything. Okay, there's a difference between income, even if you have $1 million, and wealth. Income is the index of consumption. You could buy cars and buy houses. How many black athletes go broke after they leave the sport? Okay, what did they invest in? Wealth is based on ownership. Okay, if they have nothing. So having $1 million, and those are the images we are shown. Okay, look, he got $1 million. Why are you complaining about, reparations? No. Who still owns the majority of the society? This is the same people who have always owned a large part of this white America, white privileged Americans, white males. And they are still to this day trying to maintain that power and privilege by the law they're still trying to manipulate. And if you don't participate to fight those laws, then you will have problems. The issues will not go away. Let's go on. Got about a few minutes. The idea that the African American community can exercise effective power politically or otherwise in today's society without simultaneously exercising an economic power is a fantasy. Let's go on. One of the many harmful myths about the inner city community is that there is a generally low average income and make them unprofitable localities for the retail and other investments, even though this myth seems to be ignored by other ethnic groups who make money within our communities. So interest groups are always going to be fighting, and if we don't protect our communities, okay, then we will be independent on other people to keep us viable. I'm gonna stop right here, and I hope I gave you a little insight in what I'm talking about. Unless you participate in your own healing, there's nothing else is going to happen. Nobody else is going to do anything for you. And what anybody else do for you in that way, state of mind, is only going to be temporary, okay? Because you have not conditioned yourself to do the work. So until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.